Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the various autopilot modes on the 777-300ER by PMDG. Now one of the things you have to know about the autopilot in this aircraft is it follows a slightly different philosophy than aircraft such as the Boeing 737, and that is that this autopilot is really going to be kind of running the show for most of the flight, whereas in a 737, the autopilot is basically there to hold the wheel for you, depending what particular operation you're completing at a given moment, kind of a thing like that. So because of that, a lot of these systems are going to be integrated with each other. And what I mean by that is my LNAV and VNAV are going to be reading off of the FMS. The speed selection here is going to be reading off of the FMS. We don't have a little button over here to set takeoff power or anything like that. All that stuff is basically going to be interacting with the internal computer to set most of these modes. One of the things I like to tell people when they're first learning this particular autopilot is to kind of learn how to do it manually and then learn how to do it automatically. The reason being is it's going to make you a little less insane later on. Trust me on that one, kind of thing like that. So the first thing I'm going to do before we get into the autopilot is, you can see I've got True to Life on there. I'm going to go to my controls and I'm going to add a key for auto throttle. Now, the reason I tell people to do this, this is very important here, actually, if I just type in GA, let me go ahead and type in GA, there we go. Do you notice there's this thing that says auto throttle to GA, and I've already bound it to a button? You're going to want to do that. And now the reason for this is when you do use the auto throttle, which is fantastic on this aircraft, the actual switch for the auto throttle is right here on the back side of the actual throttle. Now, if you want to reach down here and actually click this spot to get auto throttle to engage, that's on you, but I find that kind of dangerous. It's just much easier to just push a button. Now, there's another really, really helpful thing I'm going to show you when you're learning the autopilot. And if you look over here at my little N1 display, do you see how this white line appears when I move my throttle? That white line is a setting inside of PMDG here that allows me to see what my throttle is set to. So the reason I love that is I can shove my throttle to this green line here and know I'm not going to over rev anything because it's basically the desired takeoff power setting, which is super duper handy if you want to think about it another way. So that's all set. That's all ready to go. I've got everybody else going. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a standard takeoff here, and we're going to go ahead and use the takeoff and go around function. Now, there's a couple little details that you're going to see here. One, of course, is if you come down here to the autopilot itself, you'll notice that our currently selected mode is going to be shown at the top, whereas a reminder mode is going to be over here on the left. And one of the things you'll see here is this LNAV, VNAV reminder. And now the other thing you'll notice here is this is in white and this is in green. This particular autopilot works by the same basic principle. Whenever something is green, it is on. Whenever something is white, it is ready or armed. So for example, if I were to come in here and activate LNAV and VNAV, lateral and vertical, you could actually see it appears in white underneath my current mode. Now the reason it does that is basically just to give me a little heads up to say, hey, this is what we're waiting for. This is what's armed. So if you're ever not sure what's going on, you can always come down here and just look at what mode it's actually currently set to. So go ahead and pop those both off. You'll notice right now it is set to heading cell mode. The reason for that, of course, is when we line up at the runway, let me go ahead and make sure I'm perfectly lined up here, we can actually set the runway heading in here just like this. And the reason this is so handy is one of the things you'll notice is my flight director, which consists of this little plus here, will actually center itself here. So if I look out the window here, you can see it's right on the runway. I'm looking down here, you can see it's right on the runway, and actually help us in low visibility situations like today's actual weather. Now, one of the things I was saying a moment ago was the fact that all these things are integrated. So if you don't engage certain modes, the behavior is going to change drastically. So what we're going to be doing is using toga with heading select and actually leaving LNAV and VNAV off. The reason I want to do this is I want to show you that this particular selected speed is going to stay constant. And that's going to make things very interesting for us. And you'll see exactly what I mean. So let's go ahead and get this thing started. I've got my auto throttle armed. Everything else is off. I've got heading select already picked. I picked that one already, so it's ready to go. I've got my selected altitude. All my flaps are set. Everything else is good. Spoilers, everybody's looking pretty good. Let's get going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my throttles. I'm going to push them about halfway forward. And you're going to feel the whole engine's going to start rumbling, and I want to wait for them to stabilize. Now I'm going to press my toga button. Now I'm going to let go of my throttles, and what you're going to see is the engines are going to spool themselves up automatically to their max continuous. Now one of the cool, your derated mode, you'll actually see this little blue line here, which is telling me I'm not actually lined up with it. There we go, looks good. So we're going to get ripping down the runway here. Again, our flight director is actually providing us with little cues there. I can actually look down and not look out my window at all and know exactly how lined up I am with that specific heading. Now we're approaching our V1 speed here, getting a little bit of a crosswind. We'll go ahead and pop that up. Now, you're going to see a lot of little things going on here. One thing you'll observe, of course, is if I look out the front window there, my nose is attempting to pitch itself up extremely steeply. And now we're just sort of sitting here. We're just sort of sitting here. You can see my engines are happily crunching along here. We're still leaving the flaps down. Obviously, whenever you're doing any sort of takeoff like this, you want to be mindful of any sort of immediate disruptions to anything. But one of the things you're probably observing is this aircraft is basically trying to, just sort of chill at about 175 knots. As a matter of fact, if I sit here, let me go ahead and pop up one click of flaps here and create myself a bit of a problem, you will notice that it's still basically trying to maintain that speed, even though it is actually into my stall speed here. I'm actually intentionally keeping the nose down here. And that is because my selected speed is what everything is trying to maintain. Now, where it gets very interesting here, so let me go ahead and change my selected speed here. Let me see, I want a selected speed of 205 knots. There we go. I'm going to let it speed up. And what you'll observe here is that my aircraft is basically my flight director, if you look down there at the bottom, is trying to go ahead and correct myself. I'm actually intentionally keeping the nose down here to stop myself from stalling, to get myself up to this newly selected speed. Now, where this gets really, really funky is, let's say I'm going to level off here. I'm actually going to go ahead and push my nose forward here. Pushing it forward, I'm going to bring up my last clicks of flaps here. I'm just going to hold about 7.5 degrees here. Again, we're holding that same heading. We're not going to the next point. Now, one of the things that you're going to start to see happen here, which I find very, very interesting, let me go push the nose down, is this aircraft is continuing to maintain that takeoff thrust. And if you actually look up here, you'll see it says toga up here in the corner. And the reason it says toga is it's assuming that that's the current setting that we require, even though it's not necessarily the setting that we require. Again, going back to what I was warning you earlier, it doesn't know that we want less than that. So it's just kind of powering along here at this mode right now. And it's not allowing us to do anything else. Now, what you're probably saying is, but what if I want to actually select the speed I want to go? Well, if I come down here and click on this button here, what's going to happen is absolutely nothing, because the aircraft still thinks it needs to be on takeoff and go around mode. Now, if I wanted to do something really, really reckless, I could actually come down here and I could shut off this button here, but you'll notice that also will not disengage because of that enabled mode. Now, you're sitting here going, oh, how do I fix this? How do I fix this? I don't want it to be in this mode. What if I just shut it off? Well, if you shut it off, you're going to get an auto throttle disconnect warning, which is, again, going back to my previous point here. This aircraft will not disengage takeoff go around mode until we achieve the altitude that we have selected. Now, I've got manual control of the thrust right now. And again, if I go back up to that mode, let's say I want to re-enable everything one more time, put on AT one more time, but let's go ahead and press the hold button. Now, what that's going to do is that's going to order the aircraft to hold my current altitude. So now if I just level off like this and I'll let it come down, let me go ahead and actually activate the autopilot for a second. What you're going to observe is toga has finally disengaged itself. Now, I can't emphasize that enough. If you're sitting here fighting with it, it's a lot of the reasons that that's happening is because you don't realize that it's in toga. It's not going to shut that off until you do something otherwise, until it gets to that first altitude. I'm actually going to hit lateral navigation here. So the aircraft is actually going to go ahead and take its right turn here. Now, the cool thing is I can actually come in here and dial in a specific speed. Let's say I want to do 250 knots here, which is perfectly acceptable. This aircraft will actually attempt to maintain this 250 knots now. And the reason it's going to attempt to maintain those 250 knots is because we have dialed it and we are no longer in that mode. You see over here on the left where it says SPD? SPD means selected speed mode. So we've selected a specific speed and the aircraft is going to attempt to maintain it. So that is kind of the auto throttle sort of takeoff go around. Let's take a look at some other settings. So right now, one of the things you'll observe here is our first waypoint is over here at veers, and we want to point our aircraft towards it. So there's a couple different ways we can do that. Now, your first brain says, I'm going to press LNAV, which simply means left, right, lateral navigation here. And you'll observe that it is not pointing towards veers. As a matter of fact, it's off our 90 now. And the reason it's doing this is because it needs to line up with this course line in order to actually capture it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, push the select button, and I'm simply going to adjust our heading. Go ahead and give it some nice cranks here. And one of the nice things is you get that little magenta line of safety here. And it actually will tell you exactly what it is you're trying to achieve. So in this case, I have lateral navigation armed because it's in white, and I'm heading select on because it is in green. We're also maintaining a specific speed, which you can see I've selected in that window there. And you can also see the fact that we're on altitude hold mode because it is green. Now your brain's going to go, but wait, you're 32,000 feet over here. Why did it not go to 32,000? Because we're on hold mode. That's important here. And one of the things you'll see here is that we can disengage that to continue our climb in a few seconds. But again, I'm trying to simplify things a little bit here. So that's up. We're going to be moving there. So let's say we go ahead and are flying and holding this altitude of this bizarre 7260 feet. Hey, it's an example. You do what you want. And they say, could you go ahead and climb and maintain 10,000 feet, 10,000? And you're like, sure, I could do that. So what you would do is you first select the altitude you wish to climb at, and then you would go ahead and start your climb. So let me come over here. If you press this button, by the way, you can change between hundreds and you can change between thousands. Very handy. There's my 10,000. Now, how do we get up to that altitude? There's a bunch of different ways we can do it. One of the simplest ways we can do it is we can come over here and we can press the VS button. When we push that, it allows us to select what vertical speed we want to climb at. So if I were to come in here and do, let's say, 1,500 feet per minute, a couple things are going to happen. First of all, you're going to hear my engine spooling up. And the reason they are is my aircraft is trying to maintain 250 knots. The second thing you're going to observe is our active pitch mode is going to switch to V/S, which stands for vertical speed. Now, if I look over here on the side of my vertical speed indicator, you'll notice I'm climbing at roughly 1,500 feet per minute. It's going to take a second to settle. Again, we're not that big of a climb here, and everything is going to be proceeding normally. Now, it's important to note that if we did not have auto thrust on and we were to do this, it would basically slow our airplane down significantly because we didn't add that extra thrust for that climb, kind of a thing like that. Now, the other mode we can use to go ahead and climb is we can use our flight level change mode, which is fantastic. What that does is spools up full power and tries to climb as fast as it can. So if I press Flitch, what you'll observe is I immediately get climb power selected. The other thing you'll observe is my vertical speed is going to go up fast because we're now using far more power for the climb. Now, if you're like, well, why is this thing not cranking as hard as it could a moment ago? And again, the reason for that is we're very close to the particular altitude that we need to climb to. Now, one of the cool things is when you're using any of the altitude modes on the 777 is if you get a call saying, level off at 9,000, instead of running over here and fiddling with this, we can simply press this hold button the moment we cross the particular altitude. This is a great way to basically pause. So I'll give it a few moments to kind of enjoy a nice little climb here. I'm going to pause right there at 9,000 feet. You can see we're about 8,900 right now. So we're climbing perfectly smoothly there. About 550. Again, we're not getting full power at any point here. And there's 9,000. Press hold. So now you'll notice speed, lateral navigation, and ALTs. Did you notice, by the way, LNAV just kicked in? And the reason LNAV just kicked in is we actually got physically close enough to our desired course and run an intercept course with our desired. So that's actually going to go ahead and lock on, and this plane will actually start following the magenta line of safety, and we'll start sequencing our waypoints at the same time. And again, that's just a cool feature of this. Now, let's say we want to go ahead and do some more climbing here. Let's say I want to go up to original cruise altitude of 32, which is pretty high. Now, what I want to do is I want to have the computer to actually do all the climbing for us. I don't want to be sitting here and fiddling with flight level change and things like that. What I can do now is because I've actually dialed in all the different, these are all altitude constraints into my FMS when I was programming it, I can now actually come over here and press in VNAV. When you press VNAV, you are basically surrendering control of everything vertical in speed to your flight management system on board here. And one of the things you'll notice here is everybody comes and kicks in at the same time. You'll notice we got VNAV speed over here. You'll notice lateral navigation is selected here. You'll also notice that it is attempting to power climb here. Basically, it's all pulled up. Speaking of power climbing, another useful button that we have on the Autopilot panel is the Climb Con button. What this will do is if we were a little bit different, again, we're on VNAV here, this will allow us to change our active thrust setting. So now that we're climbing pretty powerfully here, I'm actually going to disengage VNAV and switch on Flitch here, which is basically going to go ahead and give us our climb. Now, when I press my climb and con, because of the configuration, this won't do anything for us. Like I said, this would choose between climb and continuous power, but because our FMS is already programmed that way, we're not going to get that benefit. So I'm just going to pop on VNAV again, and we're going to start doing our climb directly vertically. Now, as you can see, relatively straightforward system. We have our selected altitude, we have our selected direction. All these things are pre-programmed in here to make our lives a little bit simpler. That leaves a couple buttons we have way over here. One being our lock, meaning localizer, and the other one being app, which is going to be our approach. Let's go take a look at those in a moment. All right, we're about at our top of descent now. We're starting to make our way down to a Baltimore, Washington area. And I will say the weather is much better down south than it is up here today. So a couple things you have to be aware of. If you're using the autopilot for the purposes of descent, you really have two philosophical ways to approach it. The first one, of course, is you can use the vertical nav mode, which is what we're using now, or again, we can use any of the modes that you saw earlier, where we basically selected a specific vertical speed and started basically descending. One thing you have to know about the VNav, now this is really, really important with this particular unit here, is the VNav is attempting to make sure that we cross these particular altitudes at these particular waypoints. One of the things we can actually do here, so if we pop up to the data button, you can actually see what time we're going to be crossing those specific points if you're trying to get sort of a general idea of sort of what's kind of coming up along our flight here. And the reason this can be useful sometimes, if we zoom out a little bit, is it makes it really, really easy to kind of guess how long it's going to take to get to a certain altitude, in addition to what you can actually see here. The other thing you're going to observe here is we have these bright purple modes, the magentas, and it has this little A here. That is basically, if you want to think of it, has to be at that particular point. So you can see our Medana, our VOR here at flight level 216. That's basically an estimate, if you want to think about it. But we know that when we get to splat, we have to be at 2,400 feet at. We also notice that we have this 170 knot speed restriction when we get to graph, which makes it a little bit easier for us. Now, since we're going to be doing an automatic landing today, it's important that we kind of go through the motions of setting up the automatic landing before actually trying to land. So what I'm going to do is go to init ref. I'm going to go to index. I'm going to go ahead and press approach. We need to make sure all of this is pre-programmed before we try to land on it. So I'm going to go ahead and select my 3140, but I'm actually going to modify it by doing /145. We're going to give ourselves a little bit of wiggly room there. We're doing 3-3 left today, which is 9,500 feet. One of the things we can do on our way down is we're kind of waiting for that fun little landing there. Actually, let me just confirm that my navigation frequency is correct. I'll go to nav radio real fast. 1110-7335. I just like to dial this in just for my own sanity here. Fantastic. And again, this is just for me. And if air traffic control were giving you specific instructions, you could go ahead and tweak and turn and go all over the different places now that you know what you're doing. We'll pop over here real quickly. We'll do performance tool. We're doing a landing. We're doing en route landing here, which gives us a better one. We can do import from OFP, but again, you can import the aircraft details. You're not going to get much here. So I'm going to do 3-3 left. It's going to give us all the details. It is dry, unlike the other ones. Let's see here. We're going to go ahead and dial in our reverser. It's operating no problem. Non-normal condition. Everything's working fine. Auto brakes. I just say S3 VREF add. There's our 5 knots real quickly there. But import it. I can go press calculate. And you can see here, we're going to be using a lot of runway here. It's about 7,400 feet of runway. That's enough. That's enough. And of course, it gives us our VREF of 153 here, which is just a little bit different than what we calculated it. But again, that's not that big a deal because, like I said, the way we have this all set up here. So it looks pretty good to me. Let's go take a look down here. 145. Yeah, it looks pretty good to me. It's giving me a drag required. The reason it's telling me that is because of the fact that we're basically trying to fall down from 32,000 feet and get all the way down. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fast forward to right as we're about to round this corner so we can take a look at the last 2 autopilot modes. All right, we're looking a little closer here. Now we have a bit of a puzzle here, and right now the angle of this aircraft is way too sharp to be able to just round this corner at the last second and basically be lined up. So what we're going to do is we're going to play a little bit of air traffic control here in order to do a slightly better approach than we have now. We can take that turn, but it's expecting 2,400 feet. We got to get down there pretty darn soon. In the real world, air traffic control would actually vector you out here. So let's go ahead and apply some of the cool skills that we've learned here to actually go ahead and fix my little vector here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab my heading selector here, and I'm going to set it to the opposite heading that we have for the actual runway. So the nice thing is I can just keep cranking this, and one of the things that works really well is if you switch to center mode, it makes it really, really obvious what you got to do to make that turn. So you can see the way it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and select there. It's actually going to disengage lateral navigation here, which is what we want. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to use this as a way to turn us around so that you can go ahead and line ourselves up with our landing a little better. We'll go ahead and do a little bit of time acceleration there to kind of just give you an idea of what we're up against kind of a thing. So we're going to go ahead and take our nice little left turn here. You can see we're kind of swinging around here, looking pretty good. What we're also going to do is we're going to start slowing down a little bit. So we're going pretty fast for this approach here. So we're going to need to slow down. That looks pretty good right there. And you can see we're now basically flying a back course away from our little runway here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disengage VNav. And of course, when we go to disengage VNav, it's going to get very grumpy at us because it's still going to be on path mode. And the reason it's on path mode right now is because it is our currently selected vertical speed. So if we want to get rid of VNav, we have to actually change what mode of VNav we're in. So for example, if I actually would come over here and, for example, let's see, we're coming about 1,200 feet per minute. If we went over here and set this down to 1,200 feet per minute, you will notice VNav kicked out, and now we have control of our speed, which is exactly what we want to do, because we can actually come in here now and pick a 200 knot speed. And since speed mode is selected over here on the left, it's going to attempt to maintain that speed as we kind of come around this corner here. Now we got to slow down, and we actually have to get a little bit closer to our target. You can see we're basically going to run out of localizer here real fast. So to help us out a little bit here, we're going to go ahead and dirty up the airplane a little bit. And again, it does not take much on this aircraft to get it pretty dirty. You can see our flap limit speed is at 245 here. So we can go all the way there, and you can see we're at 235 right now. And again, those big flaps that start to drop down the side of the aircraft there, if we actually jump to the back, make a huge difference as far as increasing the overall drag of this plane. You can see they're just kind of lengthening my wing there as I come jump to the front. Definitely will be a separate video. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and do a 180, now that we're starting to slow down a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and get ready for actual landing here. So I'm going to go ahead and select our landing speed here, which you probably remember that from a few moments ago, and I'm just going to assume that air traffic control basically called us up and said basically we're going to flip direction here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab in here, and you can see I can square it off, but I'm not just going to square it off. I'm actually going to turn this around completely here. There we go. There we go, right there. And actually, 2,500 is plenty. At 2,000, I'm intentionally going to go a little low on the glide slope here. It's going to make my life a little bit simpler. Let's go ahead and, if we take a look at our maximum speed limits, we get 230. We're actually just the right speed for the next click of flaps. Again, we are a very big airplane, so we need a lot of drag to help slow this thing down. I'm just going to pull this around all the way here. And we're going to start feeling that effect of that. So one of the things I'll change here is I'll swing over to app mode. And you can see I'm just ready to cross the particular localizer there, which is perfectly fine. Those of you who've flown general aviation planes, you've seen all this fun before, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Keep an eye on your airspeed, though. You can see we're starting to get a little slow as we're coming around this corner here. So I'm going to continue dirtying up the plane. There we go. Looks good. It's going to give me a heads up to remind me I have not engaged my landing gear. I'm not going to worry about that too much because I can just go ahead and engage them anytime. And again, we're going to finish our turn here and I'll basically be set up really, really well to demonstrate the last two modes here. All right. So what are the difference between lock and app? Let's show you. So what I'm going to do is come over here and press the localizer button. What the localizer button will do is it'll cause this aircraft to capture the localizer. Now, if you take a very, very careful look on my actual map here, let's go switch back to app mode real quickly here. You can see the localizer is represented by this little magenta line here. And what you're observing here is this aircraft is now actually turning to go ahead and intercept the localizer. And it's actually doing a very, very nice job of it. You can see that as it swings around, it is actually centering itself up quite nicely there so that it is now captured. Now, one of the parts that everybody gets confused is because you're in localizer mode does not mean you're going to have glide slope. That's an important concept to be aware of. Now, because we're doing an ILS approach here, my glide slope is represented by this little diamond right now. As you can see, we're pretty far away. I intentionally did this approach extra long here so that you could see very, very clearly just how far out of a difference that can make. And again, give you a pretty good idea. So let's go ahead and fast forward time a little bit here. And again, it's going to be a pretty long approach because I gave ourselves so much distance to actually make this. And of course, we're doing 160 here instead of, a faster speed than that. Part of the fun, as they say. Let's go ahead and speed up time even more here. Now, this is really important. You'll notice I'm about to cross glide slope. Unless I come over here and press the APP button, it will not capture the glide slope. As a matter of fact, you see how glide slope was armed, and you see how glide slope just kicked in as soon as I crossed that particular point there, which is exactly what we expected as far as this particular ILS approach goes. So we can see right now our left-right mode, or roll mode if you want to think about it, is localizer. Our up-down mode is glide slope, and you can see our current auto throttle mode is set to speed. Let me give you a couple quick tips of this. One thing that I do is that once the aircraft is settled, it's going to take a second to settle. We're moving pretty darn fast here. One of the things I'll do is see this little blue line here. I'll try to line up my throttle with the auto throttle so when it kicks off. Now, what we need to decide is whether or not we're going to let the plane land itself. This is one of the really, really cool things about this particular aircraft, which always puts a huge smile on my face. I love how it's giving me an insufficient fuel warning here. The destination's right here, Chief. One of the interesting things is you will notice on my way down, two new modes have armed. One is called the rollout. The other mode is called flare. What this aircraft will now do is, because I have Land 3, is it will actually land itself. And we'll actually demonstrate that to you during our approach here. Now, of course, if we're going to do this properly, we're going to climb the back. And I don't know why it's quieter back here. I'm basically right next to the engine. Now, I can't tell you how many times I hate this beltway, by the way. This one goes, if you have to get the rental car facility, it's all the way over here on the right after you come out of the airport. So the most incredible thing here is I don't have to do anything except engage the thrust reversers once we get down to the ground. So I can actually enjoy my nice little kind of like last part of my trip here. Oh man, I remember when these apartments didn't exist. But again, I was a little bit younger back then, and it's just, I love doing stuff like this. And again, we'll jump up front because, again, we're here for the autopilot calculations here. Checklist incomplete normal. That's perfectly fine. I'm not going to stress about it too much. The couple little pieces there that I'm missing, but that's not the purpose of this. This is to show you how this works. So one thing you have to know about Land 3 is you want to put your hand right next to the go around button. And if things don't look right, stomp on the toga / go around button and just do it again. And that's really, really important. And the reason it's screaming at me right now is we never actually set things like minimums or anything like that. And again, I can go to radio here and I can set this to 200. And now at least the radio minimums are all set. And there's other steps too. But again, we're just here to show you this. So it's just going to yell at me to give me a heads up saying, hey, you're about to do it. There's minimums. And this is the most incredible thing about this airplane, is watching it automatically land itself will offend you. Now, because we have auto throttle armed, because my approach is already armed, it will do everything for us. This is incredible. Watch this. See how the nose came up? Get your hand on the throttle. Wait for the bump.
5.
On the ground, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and use our reverse thrust. This is your responsibility. These aircraft, see how it's actually trying to stabilize itself on the runway? I'm not touching my rudders. I hate this so much. It feels so unnatural. And we're waiting for 80 knots here. There is 80 knots right there. We're going to come off the thrust, switch to manual braking. And as you could see from my diagram earlier, we use basically exactly as much runway as we said we would. Autopilot and auto thrust are going to come off here. We no longer need them. Usually you just have a button for that kind of a thing like that. And now we just scoot off the runway. So as you can see, this is a very, very, very sophisticated autopilot that can do some incredible things if you're careful with it. The important thing to remember is if you're ever lost, look down there and see what mode it thinks it wants to be in. And that's often going to be your safest bet for the purposes of knowing what to do next. Enjoy.